Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something pretty unique.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, these stones, and I'm using air quotes here, from a book called, and I'm going to try to pronounce this right, by an author who goes by the name of ОНID.
Yeah, in this book, right from the start, it kind of grabs you, is actually their fourth collection of 1,000 stones.
Wow.
And each one of these stones, they're not like, rocks you pick up on the beach, but they're more like these little nuggets of thought, reflections, observations about life, and, well, about everything, really.
So it's like looking into the mind of this author one thought at a time.
Exactly, like a kaleidoscope of ideas, almost.
Okay, so where do we even begin with something like this?
Yeah.
1,000 of these little stones of thought.
Well, one thing that really struck me as we started going through these stones was how Yaya brings together technology, consciousness, and emotion. It's like they're trying to figure out, well, what it means to be human in this this crazy age of technology where everything's changing so fast.
Makes sense. Especially given this is their fourth collection. Like, they've been thinking about this stuff for a while.
Yeah.
So are there any specific stones that we found that really get at this whole, convergence of technology, consciousness, and emotion?
Yeah, definitely. One that really jumped out was this idea of model nothingness.
Model nothingness.
Yeah, it's this concept that pops up again and again, and it really makes you rethink, how we usually see things. It's described as this, space that's filled with a quantum field, a place where anything is possible.
Okay, so how do we go from nothingness to, pure potential?
Yeah.
It seems kind of contradictory.
Right. It's like, how can nothing be the starting point for everything?
Exactly.
But then Buccio goes on to mention this model event of positive feedback nature. It sounds very much like a Big Bang sort of thing, where everything just explodes outwards from this initial nothingness.
So it's like even nothingness can't stay still. Like there's this built-in instability, and that becomes the driving force of creation.
Exactly. And, when you think about it, doesn't that resonate with our own lives? Those times when you feel stuck, empty, lost. Maybe that's the nothingness gathering, potential for something new to come into being.
I like that. It makes this really abstract concept feel a bit more relatable.
Yeah.
And speaking of relatable, there's this recurring image of light emerging from darkness, especially this word Wijef, followed by Wei, which means electromagnetism and light.
Right.
It's like a metaphor or something.
Yeah.
Is that tied to this whole model nothingness idea?
It definitely seems connected, but it's not just a simple connection. There's this sense of anticipation of waiting for something to spark. There's this phrase, and I'll try my best with the pronunciation here. Weish, way, war, warief.
Well, hold on. Separated by chronotope.
Yeah.
Well, what is that? Some kind of time warp. Break that down for me.
So the chronotope is kind of key in a lot of these stones. Think of it as this idea that time and space, they're not separate things. They're woven together, inseparable, forming this fabric of reality,
Oh, yeah.
So this electron, it's not just separated by distance, but also by this chronotope.
That's a fabric of time and space.
Exactly. And it's it's yearning for light across this divide.
Whoa. So even an electron, this tiny particle, is experiencing this longing and anticipation across time and space. That's a pretty profound thought.
It really is. And it adds a whole other layer to this model nothingness concept. It's even in the void, there's this inherent desire for connection, for something more, for light.
It's like that spark of creation is embedded in everything, even the smallest things.
Yeah.
So we've got this model nothingness, this potential for, everything to emerge.
Yeah.
And this yearning for light. What else did you find in these stones?
Well, another big theme that kept coming up was this constant interplay between chaos and order. It's like the universe, and by extension, I think, our lives, are constantly in this state of flux.
Yeah.
Teetering on the edge of collapse,
Yeah, we see that in the imagery of, warlords in the spiral of death.
Right.
Where it seems like these power structures are so fragile, so prone to sudden chaotic shifts. It's kind of a bleak outlook, isn't it?
It can be, but it's also, I think, a reflection of reality. There's this powerful line. Sus.
Yeah.
Every ruler must be ready for an attack.
So even in positions of power, there's this need for constant vigilance, for adaptability in the face of, ever-present threats.
Absolutely. It speaks to, I think, the very nature of leadership, this need to balance strength with adaptability in a world that's, well, fundamentally unpredictable.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Like, you can't just create order and expect it to stay that way.
Right.
You got to constantly work to maintain it, to navigate those chaotic forces that are always at play.
Exactly. And it's not just true for leaders, it's true for all of us. We're all navigating this dance between chaos and order, both in our own lives and in the wider world.
So how does connect this dance between chaos and order to, like, our inner lives?
That's where things get really interesting. There's this one stone that describes this process of merging like the audio-visual channel in your thoughts and feelings, like slowly visualizing losses, shame, fears, dreams. It talks about the diffusion of the soul, almost like confronting and integrating these chaotic elements within ourselves.
It's like a form of meditation almost, right? Bringing order to the chaos within by acknowledging and processing these difficult emotions.
It does, doesn't it? And it really highlights this connection between mind and body. The stone even mentions like normalizing hormones and running a diagnosis, which just reinforces that link between our physical and mental states.
So we're not just talking about like abstract concepts of chaos and order here. It's about how we experience these forces within ourselves and our own minds and bodies, and how we find balance, well, within.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how these stones blend these philosophical ideas with these almost technological metaphors. It's like their ideas trying to find a new language to describe the human experience in this digital age.
And maybe a new way of understanding it, one that acknowledges this constant interplay between chaos and order within us and in the world around us. It's definitely making me think differently about my own experience.
And that's just the start. There's so much more to unpack in these stones, from exploring human nature and how we build societies to the impact of technology on our very consciousness.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's dive deeper into these themes after a quick.
Yeah.
And actually, you know what? Let's just keep going. I'm way too interested to stop now.
All right, let's do it.
So when we talk about the human experience, when we talk about the human experience, does the ОНID, do they get into like, human nature, how we build societies, that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's this real philosophical depth to these stones. Like they're grappling with some pretty big questions about who we are and how we fit into this whole, cosmic picture.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm really enjoying about these stones is how they connect like these grand ideas with like the everyday human experience.
Exactly.
One that really stuck with me, I'm going to try my best with the pronunciation here, Charo. Sorrow, your Charo, you persiste, just persiste for me. Basically saying that humans release the warmth of body and soul outwards, dismantling order into chaos, and then absorb energy within.
Wow, yeah, what an image, right?
Yeah.
It suggests that simply by existing, like just by being here, we're impacting the world around us. We're constantly in this exchange of energy, giving and receiving, but also, potentially disrupting things.
It's like we're both creators and destroyers, always shaping and reshaping the world around us.
Right.
But you said potentially disrupting. Is that always a bad thing?
Well, not necessarily. Remember how those stones keep emphasizing this back and forth between chaos and order?
Yeah.
Disruption can be a catalyst for change, for growth, even for new kinds of order to emerge.
So it's not about trying to eliminate chaos entirely.
Right, exactly.
It's more about like understanding how it interacts with order and how we navigate that.
Exactly. It's all about balance. And there's this other stone that really illustrates this point. It talks about positive feedback loops and the saturation of systems, and it uses this kind of a dark example, a killer who, to avoid getting caught, goes on like this massive killing spree.
Okay, that's pretty intense,
Yeah.
but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like our actions have consequences, right? Unintended consequences. And systems can really spiral out of control if we're not careful.
It speaks to the need for balance, for like checks and balances, both within ourselves and in the systems we create.
Absolutely. So, we've talked about chaos and order, disruption, energy.
Yeah.
What about like systems of belief, like religion?
Yeah.
Does Sanity touch upon that at all?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that too.
Well, they definitely do. And we see some pretty different perspectives on it. One stone is, it's pretty cynical. It says, Niafa, religions lived on lies, basically. It talks about how they got all tangled up with politics, how they manipulated people, even caused violence, all in the name of, God.
Wow, that's a pretty harsh critique.
It is. But then we also have these stones with this really mythic imagery, like, Jesus, and an angel descended.
Yeah.
It feels much more spiritual, almost hopeful.
It's like Tiny D is capturing this tension that exists around faith, right? Like in our modern world, we're grappling with skepticism and this very human need to believe in something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's like, here's the darkness, here's the light, now what are you going to do with it?
Right. And speaking of darkness and light, there's this phrase that really got me thinking. Jewel. Shul. Black plague killed worlds of worlds.
Oh, yeah.
What an image, right?
Yeah, it's haunting, isn't it? And it's really open to interpretation, but for me, it speaks to this fragility of existence, It's like a reminder that annihilation is always a possibility, not just for individuals, but for entire civilizations, even universes, maybe.
It's terrifying and awe-inspiring at the same time. It makes you wonder if these events are they random, or are they part of some bigger pattern?
Right. And if there is a pattern, what's our role in it? Are we just destined to keep repeating these cycles of creation and destruction? Or can we break free somehow?
Whoa, those are some heavy questions.
Yeah.
Speaking of heavy concepts, is this one that kept popping up that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. The reduction in projected complexity of reality.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Can you help me unpack that one?
Sure. So think of it this way. Reality is, it's incredibly complex, right? To even begin to understand it, we have to simplify it. We create these mental models, we focus on certain things, and we ignore others,
So it's like we're always working with this like simplified version of reality, a projection of the real thing.
Exactly. And what the stone suggests is that this act of simplifying, of reducing complexity, it takes energy.
Right.
Like it takes effort to maintain our limited understanding of the world.
So to really understand the world, we have to be willing to put in the effort to actively engage with its complexity, to keep expanding our awareness.
Precisely. And we can't forget that there's always this devil of chaos lurking in the details. Things are rarely as simple as they seem on the surface. It's a reminder to be wary of oversimplification, to embrace the nuances.
So we've got this tension between the need to simplify to understand and the danger of oversimplifying.
Right.
And lurking in those details is this potential for chaos to come in and disrupt everything.
Exactly. And then, to make things even more interesting, there's this recurring motif of the chronotope that we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
It keeps popping up in different contexts, like playing with our perception of time and space.
Yeah, you mentioned it before with that electron yearning across time and space.
Right.
What other examples did you find?
Well, there's this one that describes artillery aiming in the chronotope.
Artillery aiming in the chronotope.
Yeah, it sounds strange, but it paints this picture of time as this fluid dimension constantly changing and being reshaped.
So it's like those projectiles aren't just traveling through space, they're moving through this fabric of time and space.
A chronotope.
Yeah, and we're trying to predict and control their movement in this dynamic, always changing environment.
Right. And remember, the chronotope isn't just this abstract concept. It's something we experience ourselves subjectively.
Yes, for sure.
Think about how sometimes time seems to fly by, and other times it feels like it's just dragging on forever.
Absolutely. We all have those moments where time feels distorted, like it's not this fixed linear thing.
Exactly. And I think that's another way that Piaget's is challenging us to rethink our assumptions. Time isn't just this external objective thing. It's something we experience and interpret in really personal ways.
Like when you're completely absorbed in something, you lose all track of time.
Right.
Or when you're anxiously waiting for something, every second feels like an hour.
Exactly. Our emotions, our state of mind, it all affects how we perceive time. And speaking of how our minds are influenced, I think it's time we dive into one of the most fascinating themes in these stones, the impact of technology on human consciousness.
Yes. Okay, this is what I've been waiting for. We've kind of been dancing around it, but let's get into the specifics. What does Tarzi have to say about how technology is changing us?
Well.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dig into these stones from ADs. We've covered a lot of ground, like that model nothingness thing. This whole chronotope concept.
Right.
How even nothingness, has this potential for creation.
It's pretty mind-bending stuff.
Yeah, it is. But now I'm really curious, what does ID have to say about technology and consciousness? It feels like we're at this point in history where technology is like advancing so fast, and it's really starting to change who we are.
Totally. It's like changing how we think, how we experience the world, even.
And are we ready for it? Like, do these stones give us any clues?
Well, there's this one stone that really blew my mind. It goes, and I apologize in advance for my pronunciation. Wad ako no, walo bro, o cookies, o koksho, po kam do word, o kam you
Mm-hmm.
It's in Brazil now for Kevano. The performances, there was the matter achiever for a few of our variation model careful of J. Verish, there's Mama after what of wider Shevishim of the special clear perfuavage the cave a performer that the fart east was kish the for better was with Vernost of that server for Varia. No, the discussion of that fest for the more pressure the Varia for publishing, but that's their first of the that's here where. Der band go that fifth in a fifth that my law for fifth for serve fish area for fest that most mess for fish bash of that that the refresh of his that chop measure the fish that rest of his move that just never that measures that for pressure of vesture that myself of his in the fish that of that fish and the big shaft that they have.
Whoa, okay. A lot to unpack there. Let's start with, like, what's with the void in the stars? It's presumably Felicity Bachter's The Food.
So the stone starts with this small void, right?
Mm.
It could be that singularity before the Big Bang, that moment of pure potential.
Okay.
And then bam, stars and galaxies are like unfolding before their eyes, this incredible awe-inspiring moment of creation. And there's this overwhelming sense of pride, like witnessing the birth of the universe.
It's giving me chills just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. But then it mentions these gods being reborn and rejoicing.
Right, right.
Specifically, there's a god of waves, light, and time who's like really shining brightly. It's almost like a creation myth, but it's grounded in these scientific concepts.
So it's not like, you know, a god with a beard sitting on a cloud. It's more like these forces, these energies that, well, they govern the universe.
Yeah, that's a really interesting interpretation, and it points to how Rai blends science and mythology, like suggesting they're not as separate as we think.
Right, right.
Maybe they're just different ways of understanding the same mysteries.
It's like science can explain how things work, but it can't really answer the why. Yeah, exactly.
And that's where mythology, spirituality, our need to find meaning, that's where that comes in.
And this exploration of the universe, of time and space, it doesn't stop there. There's another stone that talks about artillery aiming in the chronotope.
Artillery aiming in the chronotope. I feel like we need to get T-shirts made with that on it.
Right. It's so out there. But it really gets at this idea of time as this fluid dimension constantly being shaped and reshaped.
So it's like those projectiles aren't just moving through space, they're traveling through this fabric of time and space.
Yeah.
The chronotope.
The chronotope.
Yeah.
And we're trying to, like, predict and control their movement within this dynamic, always changing environment.
It's a whole different way of thinking about time.
Totally.
We were talking earlier about how time can feel subjective. Like sometimes it flies by and sometimes it drags on forever.
Right.
Is that what they're getting at here?
I think so. Like, time isn't this fixed, linear thing. It's something we experience and interpret in our own unique ways.
Mm.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got these projectiles flying through the chronotope, kind of like a metaphor for what?
It's like a cosmic battle playing out across time and space.
Okay.
With these weapons as like agents of chaos and destruction.
Okay, intense.
Yeah.
But didn't you say there's also a sense of order in there somewhere?
Yeah, exactly. It's like you can't have chaos without order, you know?
Right, two sides of the same coin.
They're inseparable, totally intertwined. And maybe that's the whole point, this need for balance.
Yeah, finding that equilibrium between these opposing forces.
And speaking of opposing forces, there's this other concept that Sand keeps coming back to: interchangeability, infiltration, and replacement. What do you make of that?
That was really trippy. It's almost like watching, like, geological processes, but on a cosmic scale.
Yes. It's like the universe is constantly in flux, different elements and forces interacting, reshaping reality.
It's not about seeking stability or permanence then. It's about embracing this constant change, this dance between creation and destruction.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Like, maybe that's where the true beauty lies, in this constant evolution and transformation.
Okay, so we've explored a lot of these stones, a lot of really big ideas, and now I got to ask, What's the takeaway? What's the message?
Well, I don't think there's one easy answer, you know?
Yeah.
These stones, they're not about giving us all the answers. They're about making us think, making us question our assumptions, challenging us to find our own meaning in this crazy, complex world.
So what should our listeners be thinking about after this deep dive? What questions should they be asking themselves?
I'd say embrace the complexity. Don't be afraid to ask the big questions, even if there aren't any easy answers. And remember, even in the midst of all the chaos and uncertainty, there's real beauty in the journey of discovery.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. If our reality is always being shaped and reshaped by this dance between chaos and order, what role do we play in all of this? Are we just along for the ride? Or are we actually shaping the universe even as it shapes us? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Until next time.